People of the internet, what is up? I'm here to provide you with a little distraction from all the craziness in the world at the moment. We're going to talk about a camera, which is pretty wild for this channel. I know, really going out on a limb here with this content. Man, I keep bumping this table. I'm not in my normal studio here, and it's really throwing me for a loop. I'm still in self-quarantine for another 6 days? 6 days? 5 days? I gotta check the calendar, but I can feel freedom. The camera we're gonna be talking about today is this guy right here. This is the Fujifilm X70. If you've been watching this channel for any length of time, you will know that I had an XF10. Was it last year? Whenever it came out. I think it was last year. Could have been the year before. The years are all starting to blur together here as I get older, but I had an XF10 on loan from Fujifilm and I reviewed it, and quite frankly, I didn't like the camera. I found that their preset focus modes for street photography were pretty hilariously bad. The autofocus, I've never had autofocus misfocus more in my life than that camera. And even when it came to, you know, shooting an aperture priority or anything that wasn't fully manual, I found that the camera made weird decisions when it came to shutter speed versus ISO. And I found that my shots had motion blur more than they should have because it would pick a slower shutter speed instead of a higher ISO. I've never had that problem with another Fuji camera before. Apparently some of those things got fixed in a firmware upgrade. Honestly, I got such a bad taste in my mouth right off the bat with that camera. I don't want anything to do with it. I, among many other people, have always thought that the XF10 was disappointing because it seemed like a step backwards from this camera. Now, the XF10 is sort of from the first generation of X cameras. It was one of the last cameras to have the 16 megapixel X-Trans sensor. So in that regard, it's kind of the best you could get with the older equipment in it. Think of like a very compact XT1. That's kind of what you're getting here. It has the 18.5 millimeter f2.8 lens, which I believe is the same lens that's in the XF10. It gives you a roughly 28 mil lens, so pretty wide for a fixed lens camera. The equivalent focal length of something like an X100 is 35 millimeters, so I think they're 23 mil, I believe is what that is. This also does have a digital teleconverter, so this custom ring on the outside of the lens, you can set that to manual focus, but you can also set it to select a 35 millimeter and 50 millimeter equivalent focal length digital teleconverter, and it interpolates the sensor data and still gives you a 16.3 megapixel image when you're done. It's not bad. It's been a while since I've used this camera. This camera's about 4 years old, and I picked this one up from the London Drugs here in Vancouver. Shout out to David. Thanks for all your help there. I'm actually pretty surprised at the quality that you get from the digital teleconverter. Is it as good as the full resolution? No, it's not, but it's better than I thought it would be. They did a really nice job 4 years ago when they did this. And to be fair, the XF10 has a similar mode and it does just as good of a job. The two things that I really think they screwed up with the XF10 was that this has an articulating screen. It articulates up, it articulates down, and it articulates all the way around. So you can actually vlog with this camera, which I'll talk about later, but it is possible. The other thing that they're missing from the XF10 is an aperture ring. This thing has an aperture ring with tabs on it, kind of like the X100 series. So you can, f8 is pretty much right in the middle, and you can go either way from there. And as you know, if you learn this camera, it's very intuitive. The dial layout on the top is almost identical to the X Pro or XE series cameras. I actually have an X Pro 1 right here. You can see the dial layout there is almost identical. It's got the focus mode switch right on the front here, just like their larger cameras, so single, continuous, and manual, and it's sort of out to the side here, so it's really easy to use. This camera is tiny, so the reason I have this X Pro 1 here is to show you how small this X70 is. Let me get my big dumb hand out of the way. It is so small. Look at how small that is. And look at how thin it is. It's very, very thin. So it is actually thinner than an X Pro 1 without a lens. So this, with the lens on, is thinner than an X Pro 1 with a body cap. And the X Pro 1 is slightly larger than some of the other bodies, but it's more square, so it's easier to compare to this body. But the X Pro 2 and X Pro 3, very, very similar in size, if not identical. So the fact that they're able to pack an APS-C sensor into this little tiny camera, very reminiscent of the Ricoh GR series, is very, very impressive. Another thing about this camera is it uses the NP95 battery, so the smaller battery that you would find in the X100 series. I think the X100F went to the larger battery from the regular X series cameras, the 126, I think is what it is. I had a bunch of these batteries already from my X100, so that wasn't an issue for me, and it looks like Fuji's going in another direction with their batteries now with the X-T4 anyways, so batteries are something you're always going to be replacing and they're always going to be changing, so it's good that they have some compatibility between models, but to expect them all to use the same battery, I think we were a little spoiled for a while there with Fuji, so I don't mind using a different battery for this camera. Performance of this camera is surprisingly good for something that's 4 years old. If you've shot with an X-T1 or an X-T10, very, very similar. I find the autofocus is very, very snappy and fast in photo mode. Video autofocus is not great, and if you are going to use it for vlogging, I would turn the autofocus off. I would just have it on manual focus and pre-focus on yourself and then record, because the internal mics really pick up the autofocus motor noise on this camera, which is not that loud, but because the lens is right here and the mics are right here, it's very, very loud when you're recording. Now, what's not loud about this camera is the leaf shutter. It is one of the quietest cameras I've ever shot with. I'm gonna get it right up here and I'm gonna snap a picture. That's it. So that wasn't electronic shutter, that was leaf shutter. This is quieter than almost any camera I've ever used that's using a mechanical shutter. This leaf shutter is wonderful. It is quiet. The lens on this thing is nice and sharp. It's got a little bit of softness at 2.8, but anything from 3.5 and up is great. Yeah, it's such a good camera. I'm still really bummed that there just wasn't an X80 instead of an XF10. Like, I feel like, I know that I've talked about how I'm not going to review new cameras anymore, and sort of the first feeling I had where I thought maybe I don't want to review these new cameras anymore was with that XF10, because it seemed like a downgrade from the previous model, and maybe not in specs like on paper, but if the actual use of the camera and the build quality of the camera, they were much, much lower than this camera which it replaced. This is an all metal camera. It feels very, very quality, whereas the XF10 felt very plasticky and yeah, not great. This camera will, I'm gonna stand up here, this camera will, in a pinch, I mean, not even in a pinch, it just will. It'll fit in a front, you know what, I'm gonna put the lens cap on it though. It will fit in a front pocket. So it fits in a front pocket. I actually have my keys in there too, which I forgot about. You know, you see the lens cap here. People might think you have like chewing tobacco or something, give you some street cred. Don't do chewing tobacco. And it also fits in a back pocket, no problem. So this is very much a back pocket camera. It is, it's an excellent, excellent size. And the field of view at 28mm is very, very similar to what you would get from a cell phone camera right out of the box. Now, speaking of cell phones, I have my iPhone here. This is an iPhone 6S Plus, and don't make fun of how old my phone is. It's a work phone. I have a Samsung Galaxy S10 for my personal phone, but just as a size reference here, this is, look at how much bigger the phone is than this camera. It's huge. I mean, this is a Plus, sure, it's a big phone, but this camera is such a great size for an everyday, throw it in your pocket camera with very powerful features. That 16 megapixel X-Trans sensor is beautiful. The JPEGs that come out of here are fantastic. The RAW files are obviously great to work with in editing, but the JPEGs right out of camera are just gorgeous. You just might need a little exposure tweak here and there, but yeah, they are absolutely wonderful. People ask me about the XF10 all the time because they see my review. It seems to still make it through YouTube's algorithm. I think because it's maybe not a good review. For some reason they seem to pop up more, but I don't like doing bad reviews, so that kind of bothers me. But if you had to choose between an XF10 and an X70, even though the X70 is quite a bit older than the XF10, I would still recommend getting an X70, and they are right around the same price in the used market, which is hilarious. And it just sort of goes to show that the X70 is still pretty highly sought after. I don't know if Fujifilm sold a lot of X70s. I kind of feel like they didn't, and I got pretty lucky finding this one. It's in decent shape, and yeah, just overall, I think it's a much better camera, aside from it being, you know, 8 less megapixels than the XF10. 16 megapixels is plenty. You can blow up a 16 megapixel image pretty big before it starts to look rough, especially if you're just doing stuff for the web or small prints. Then 16 megapixels is more than enough, and you can even crop in, especially if you're using RAW files. You can absolutely crop a 16 megapixel image. So yeah, that's it. Fujifilm X70. I love this thing. I think it is absolutely wonderful. The lens cap is kind of annoying, but I think that this camera is outstanding value. Just getting myself a thumbnail here. You guys have probably figured it out by now. And yeah, if you need a second camera or a travel camera, man, this thing is great. I love it. Sorry for the lack of pictures in this review. I had planned on having more. I shot a little bit in San Diego, and then I was going to shoot some more in Arizona, but had to rush home, so I just took some pictures around the house here. I used my dog as a representation to show you guys the digital teleconverter. Probably could have done that better, but it's hard for me to get anywhere right now because I'm still self-isolating based on travel. I did beat the actual mandated self-quarantine regulations here in Canada. I was home in time where I don't necessarily need to stay home, but I'm doing it anyways, and I'm not working also. My employer has asked that I not come in, and I've just decided to stay separately from my family as well. I will go for the odd walk down to the lake across the street, but there's nobody there, and if there is, then I stay far, far away from them. I don't touch anything. So anybody worried about that kind of stuff, don't worry. I'm taking it just as seriously as I should be. So I hope everybody out there is keeping well. Hopefully life gets back to normal really soon, because it is hard to make YouTube videos about cameras when you can only go within like a block of where you are. And I'm in the suburbs where there's not a ton to take pictures of. So I'll see you guys in the next one. Be safe. Wash your hands and look after one another.